My name is Rebecca Wilson, and on my third wedding anniversary, my husband tried to kill me. You might think this is going to be a story about death, but it's actually a story about survival, about finding strength when you think you have nothing left, and about rebuilding a life from the ashes of betrayal. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am, and if it helps even one person recognize the signs I missed, then reliving these memories will be worth it. 3 years ago, I was living what looked like a perfect life in Denver. Taught art at Cherry Creek High School, lived in a beautiful townhouse in Washington Park, and was married to James Wilson, a successful investment banker who everyone thought was the perfect husband. Our Instagram was filled with hiking adventures, romantic dinners, and candid moments that made our friends jealous. We were that couple, the ones others looked up to, the ones who seemed to have it all figured out. James and I met during a charity fundraiser at the Denver Art Museum. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in my passion for art and teaching. Our courtship was a whirlwind of mountain adventures, art gallery openings, and cozy nights in. Within a year, we were married in a beautiful ceremony at the Denver Botanic Gardens. I thought I was living a fairy tale. But fairy tales aren't real, and neither was the life we portrayed to the world. It started subtly, comments about my clothing choices, suggestions about whom I should be friends with, questions about my spending habits. James had a way of making his control seem like care. "I just want what's best for you, Becky," he would say. And I believed him. I began second-guessing every decision, every friendship, every aspect of my life. The art studio in our home, which had once been my sanctuary, became a source of tension. James called it my hobby room in a tone that made me feel small. My paintings began gathering dust as I spent more time trying to be the perfect wife he demanded. My best friend Michelle noticed the changes in me, but whenever she tried to talk about it, I defended James. "He works so hard," I would say. "He just wants us to have a good life." When our third anniversary approached, James surprised me with plans for a weekend trip to Pikes Peak. It seemed like a return to our early days of mountain adventures, and I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe things would get better. Maybe we could find our way back to the couple we used to be. I packed my hiking gear with an optimism I hadn't felt in months. The morning of our anniversary, we drove south from Denver toward Colorado Springs. James was unusually quiet during the drive, but I filled the silence with memories of our first year together. He nodded and smiled, but there was something off about his expressions, something I should have recognized but chose to ignore. We parked at the trailhead around noon. The sky was a perfect Colorado blue, and the air was crisp with early autumn. James suggested we take a less popular trail, saying he'd found a spectacular viewpoint online. I trusted him. He'd always been the more experienced hiker between us. As we climbed higher, I noticed we were completely alone on the trail. No other hikers, no sounds except our breathing and the crunch of boots on gravel. After about an hour of hiking, we reached a cliff edge with a stunning view of the valley below. James suggested we take a photo together. I was fumbling with my phone when I felt his hands on my shoulders. For a moment, I thought he was going to hug me from behind, like he used to do when we first started dating. Instead, his grip tightened painfully. "You know, Becky," he said in a voice I'd never heard before, "you've become such a disappointment." His words hit me harder than any physical blow. "I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of you." Before I could process what was happening, I felt him push hard. As I fell backward toward the cliff edge, time seemed to slow down. I saw James's face, not angry, not sad, just coldly satisfied. I heard him say the words that would haunt me forever. "Now I can finally be free of you." Then I was falling. If you're wondering how I survived, I'll tell you. But more importantly, I want to tell you about what came after. How I found the strength to fight back, how I learned to trust again, and how I rebuilt my life from the pieces James tried to shatter. This isn't just my story. It's a testament to the resilience we all have inside us, even when we think we've lost everything. That moment of freefall seemed to last forever. As my body plummeted through the crisp mountain air, a strange calm washed over me. Time slowed down, and in those precious seconds my mind flashed through memories of my life before James, memories of who I used to be. I remembered the fearless girl who would spend hours in her art studio, who dreamed of inspiring students to find their creative voice, who never worried about speaking her mind. The first impact wasn't with the ground, but with the branches of a sturdy pine tree growing from the cliff face. The sharp needles tore at my clothes and skin, but those branches probably saved my life, breaking my fall before I hit the rocky slope below. I tumbled and rolled, each impact sending waves of pain through my body, until finally coming to rest on a narrow ledge about 30 feet down from the cliff edge. Everything hurt. My left arm was definitely broken, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my face, but I was alive. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard movement above, James's footsteps. He was checking to see if his plan had worked. I lay absolutely still, barely breathing, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he would hear it. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. I don't know how long I lay there on that ledge, drifting in and out of consciousness. The sun moved across the sky, and the temperature began to drop. I knew I had to move. Staying on the ledge overnight in the Colorado mountains would mean certain death. My phone was gone, probably shattered somewhere in the rocks below. I was alone, injured, and my husband had just tried to kill me. Moving was agony. Every breath sent sharp pains through my chest, suggesting broken ribs. My left arm was useless, and my right leg could barely support weight. But giving up wasn't an option. I began the slow, excruciating process of finding a way off that ledge. The slope below was steep but not completely vertical. If I could somehow make my way down. I remembered the rock climbing classes James and I had taken when we first started dating. The irony wasn't lost on me. The skills he'd taught me might now save my life from his attempt to end it. Using my good arm and leg, I started to inch my way down the slope, trying to remember everything I knew about emergency descent techniques. The journey down was a blur of pain, determination, and pure survival instinct. I used tree roots as handholds, sliding on my back when necessary, fighting through waves of dizziness and nausea. The sun was setting by the time I reached the base of the cliff, casting long shadows through the pine trees. I was far from any marked trail, with no idea which direction would lead to safety. My art students had often asked me why I always wore bright colors while hiking. "So people can find me if I get lost," I'd joke. Now my orange hiking jacket was torn and dirty, but it might be my only hope of being seen. I needed to find water, and stay alive long enough for someone to notice I was missing. A sound in the distance caught my attention. Running water. Where there's water, I reasoned, there might be people, or at least a trail. I began stumbling toward the sound, using broken branches as a makeshift walking stick. The forest was getting darker, and with darkness came cold. Hypothermia would be as deadly as my injuries if I didn't find help soon. After what felt like miles but was probably only a few hundred yards, I reached a small stream. The water was ice cold and crystal clear, typical Colorado mountain runoff. I desperately wanted to drink, but my wilderness training reminded me of the dangers of giardia. Instead, I used the cold water to clean some of my wounds and try to reduce the swelling in my arm. That's when I heard it, voices in the distance. I tried to shout, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. I gathered what strength I had left and began moving downstream, toward the sounds of civilization. The voices grew louder, and finally, I saw them. A group of hikers making their way back to the trailhead as dusk approached. "Help!" I managed to call out, my voice stronger this time. "Please help me." The hikers turned, and I saw their expressions change from surprise to horror as they took in my appearance. Two of them rushed toward me while another pulled out a satellite phone. No cellular service this far up the mountain. One of the hikers was a nurse named Karen. She quickly assessed my injuries while her husband Tom called for emergency services. The third hiker, David, gave me his fleece jacket as shock began to set in. I tried to tell them what happened, but Karen stopped me. "Save your strength," she said gently. "Help is coming." I must have passed out then, because my next clear memory is of being in a rescue helicopter, flying over the darkening Colorado landscape. The paramedics were asking me questions, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was that James would be waiting at home, probably crafting his story about how his wife had tragically fallen while taking an anniversary photo. At the hospital, everything became a blur of doctors, nurses, and questions.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
X-rays confirmed 3 broken ribs, a fractured left arm, and numerous contusions. The doctors were amazed I'd managed to climb down the cliff with those injuries. "You have an incredible will to live," one of them told me. If they only knew. Detective Sarah Martinez came to take my statement the next morning. She had kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel safer somehow. I told her everything. About the gradual control, the isolation, the psychological abuse that had led to this final, brutal attempt on my life. She listened without judgment, taking detailed notes. "Mrs. Wilson," she said when I finished, "I want you to know that I believe you. But proving attempted murder won't be easy. Your husband is probably already working on his story." She was right. A quick check of social media showed James had already posted about his tragic hiking accident and how he was praying for a miracle. That's when Michelle burst into my hospital room, tears streaming down her face. She'd seen James's post and driven through the night from Portland to reach me. One look at her face told me she knew. She'd always known something was wrong, even when I wouldn't admit it to myself. "You're coming home with me," she said, and it wasn't a question. "To Portland, as soon as you're released, no arguments." I started to protest, thinking about my students, my art classes, my life in Denver. But then I remembered that life wasn't real anymore. It had been slowly disappearing for years, replaced by the carefully constructed facade James had created. Michelle stayed with me in the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair despite my protests. She helped me deal with the endless parade of police officers, doctors, and social workers. She fielded calls from concerned colleagues and friends, protecting me from having to explain over and over what had happened. James tried to visit once. Michelle was getting coffee when he appeared in my doorway, his face a perfect mask of concern. "Darling," he started, but froze when he saw my expression. For the first time, I looked at him without the filter of love or fear. I saw him clearly, the monster behind the charming smile. "Get out," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "Get out before I call security." He started to say something else, but Detective Martinez appeared behind him. She'd been watching my room, anticipating this very visit. As she escorted him out, I saw his mask slip for just a moment. The cold fury in his eyes confirmed what I already knew. He wouldn't stop until he finished what he'd started on that cliff. That night, unable to sleep despite the pain medication, I asked Michelle for my sketchbook from my purse, the small one I always carried but had barely used in recent months. With my right hand, I began to draw. The images were dark at first. Cliffs, falling figures, shadows with James's eyes. But as the night wore on, they changed. I drew myself climbing, surviving, emerging from darkness into light. The hospital staff wanted to keep me for another day, but I knew I couldn't stay in Denver. James had connections, money, and a sophisticated understanding of how to manipulate the system. Michelle had already booked us flights to Portland, using her own credit card to avoid being traced. Before leaving, I met with a victim's advocate who helped me file for an emergency restraining order. She also connected me with a domestic violence support group in Portland and gave me resources for finding a trauma therapist. Recovery isn't just physical, she told me. You'll need help processing all of this. The morning of my discharge, Detective Martinez returned with news. They had found evidence on the cliff, scuff marks consistent with my account, broken branches showing my path of descent, even my shattered phone with its last unsent message to Michelle. Something feels wrong about this hike. But she warned, me, it still might not be enough. James would have expensive lawyers, character witnesses, and years of carefully documented social media posts showing our perfect relationship. Then we'll fight harder, Michelle said, helping me into a wheelchair. We'll fight smarter. She had already contacted her brother, a lawyer in Seattle who specialized in domestic violence cases. We had a long road ahead, but I wasn't alone anymore. As the plane took off from Denver International Airport, I watched the Rocky Mountains recede into the distance. Somewhere down there was the cliff where James had tried to end my life. Instead, he had given me back myself. The woman who emerged from those mountains wasn't the same one who had ascended them. I was stronger now, scarred, but not broken. Michelle squeezed my hand as we flew west toward Portland's gray skies and green forests. You know what the best revenge is? She asked. Living well and making art that tells the truth. I smiled, thinking of the sketchbook in my bag, already half filled with images of survival and redemption. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this. I had faced death on that mountain, and I had chosen to live. Not just survive, but truly live. James had tried to silence me, but he had only given me a stronger voice, and I intended to use it. Portland greeted me with its characteristic misty rain, so different from Colorado's sharp mountain air. Michelle's apartment was a cozy second-floor walk-up in the Pearl District, filled with the scent of coffee from her shop downstairs. The spare room she'd prepared for me overlooked a small courtyard where local artists displayed their sculptures. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe. The first few weeks were the hardest. My body was healing, but the nightmares were relentless. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt myself falling. I'd wake up gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, reaching for something to hold on to. Michelle would hear me and make tea, sitting with me until dawn broke over the city's industrial skyline. Dr. Emily Thompson, my trauma therapist, helped me understand that my mind was trying to process what had happened. Your body remembers, she explained during one of our sessions. We need to help it understand that you're safe now. She taught me grounding techniques, ways to anchor myself in the present moment when the memories threatened to overwhelm me. One morning, about a month after arriving in Portland, I found myself standing in front of an easel in Michelle's spare room. She'd set up a small studio space, complete with the art supplies I'd left behind in Denver. My hands trembled as I picked up a brush for the first time since the fall. The canvas stayed blank for hours as I stood there, fighting the voice in my head, James's voice, telling me I wasn't good enough. Finally, I closed my eyes and let my hand move freely across the canvas. When I opened them, I'd created a swirl of dark blues and purples, with a small point of golden light breaking through. It wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense, but it was honest. It was mine. I painted 3 more canvases that day, each one helping me reclaim a piece of myself. Detective Martinez called regularly with updates on the investigation. James had hired Gregory Marshall, one of Denver's most expensive criminal defense attorneys. They were building a narrative about a tragic hiking accident, portraying James as the devastated husband whose wife had vanished after a fall. His social media posts were masterpieces of manipulation, photos of our happy times together, heartfelt pleas for information about my whereabouts, carefully worded statements about praying for her safe return. The support group I joined met in a women's center downtown. Every Tuesday evening, I sat in a circle with other survivors, listening to their stories and gradually finding the courage to share my own. There was Maria, whose husband had tried to poison her slowly over years. Sarah, whose boyfriend had staged a car accident to collect insurance money. And Lisa, who had escaped her abusive wife with nothing but the clothes on her back. These women became my lifeline. They understood the complexity of abuse, how it creeps in slowly, how smart, strong women can find themselves trapped in situations they never thought they'd accept. They didn't judge me for staying as long as I did, for missing James sometimes, despite everything, for being afraid to sleep alone at night. 6 weeks after my arrival in Portland, Richard Chen, Michelle's brother and my attorney, brought news that changed everything. James had filed a missing person report, claiming I had disappeared during our anniversary hike, and he feared the worst. He was pushing for me to be declared legally dead, which would give him control over all our assets and my life insurance policy. "He's trying to write you out of existence," Richard explained, spreading documents across Michelle's kitchen table. "But we can use this. The moment he files those papers, he's committing fraud. We have proof you're alive, proof of his attempt on your life. We can turn this against him." That night, I painted until sunrise. The canvas became a battleground where I fought back against James's attempts to erase me. I painted myself emerging from darkness, my body broken but my spirit intact. When Michelle came down to open her coffee shop, she found me surrounded by finished pieces, covered in paint, finally crying the tears I'd been holding back for weeks. The next day, I did something I hadn't done since the fall. I logged into social media. James's performance as the grieving husband was convincing. Friends and colleagues had filled his timeline with messages of support and prayers. But there were cracks in his facade. Old photos he'd posted showed signs I hadn't noticed before. The tight grip on my waist that looked possessive rather than loving, the forced smile that didn't reach my eyes, the gradual disappearance of my friends from our photos. I started documenting everything. Every controlling comment I could remember, every time he'd isolated me from friends or family, every accident that had left bruises I'd explained away. I created a timeline of our relationship, watching it transform, from romance to imprisonment. The artist in me emerged again, creating visual representations of the psychological manipulation I'd endured. Detective Martinez was particularly interested in James's financial records. She'd discovered irregular transfers to offshore accounts, starting shortly after our wedding. The amounts increased over time, peaking in the weeks before our anniversary trip. It was evidence of premeditation, suggesting he'd been planning my accident for months. My art became my testimony. I began creating a series of paintings documenting my journey, not just the fall and survival, but the years leading up to it. The gradual dimming of colors in my life as James's control tightened, the moments of clarity that I'd pushed away, the strength I'd found on that mountain ledge. The local art community embraced my work, and a small gallery offered to show my pieces. The exhibition opening coincided with news from Denver. James had filed the paperwork to have me declared dead, claiming he'd hired private investigators and search teams but found no trace of me. He gave tearful interviews to local news stations, playing the part of the devastated husband perfectly. But his performance was about to end. Richard had prepared our counterattack carefully. The moment James filed the death declaration, we moved. Detective Martinez arrested him for attempted murder, fraud, and financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the physical evidence from the cliff, testimony from hikers who'd found me, and most damaging of all, a series of text messages recovered from my shattered phone showing his calculating manipulation. The arrest made headlines in Denver. James's carefully constructed image crumbled as more evidence emerged. Former colleagues came forward with stories of his controlling behavior at work. Other women shared experiences of dating him before me, describing patterns of manipulation and emotional abuse. The perfect facade he'd maintained for years shattered completely. I watched his arraignment via video link from Portland, surrounded by my support group and Michelle. The man who had once terrified me looked small in his orange jumpsuit, his practiced charm useless against the weight of evidence. When he pleaded not guilty, I felt no surprise, only a deep sadness for the years I'd lost to his lies. My art exhibition opened the next evening. I titled it Survival Geography, mapping the landscape of abuse and recovery through paint and canvas. The centerpiece was a large triptych. The first panel showed the moment of falling, the second depicted the climb back up, and the third represented emergence and healing. The gallery was packed with supporters, survivors, and art lovers. A reporter from the Portland Mercury interviewed me, asking what message I hoped people would take from my work. Abuse doesn't always look like what we expect, I told her. Sometimes it wears a charming smile and brings you coffee in bed. Sometimes it plans anniversary trips and posts loving messages on Instagram. But survival doesn't look like what we expect either. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing to climb down a mountain instead of giving up. Sometimes it's picking up a paintbrush when your hands are shaking. The exhibition became a turning point. Other survivors began reaching out, sharing their stories, finding strength in art and community. I started teaching art therapy workshops at the Women's Center, helping others express what words couldn't capture. My students from Denver sent messages of support, many sharing their own experiences with relationship abuse. 1 year after the fall, I stood at the gallery looking at my work. The paintings told a story of darkness and light, of falling and rising, of death and rebirth. Michelle stood beside me, just as she had every step of the way. "You know what I see when I look at these?" she asked, gesturing to the walls. "I see a woman who refused to be erased." James's trial was approaching, but I no longer feared facing him. My art had helped me reclaim my narrative, my voice, my truth. The woman he had tried to push off that cliff no longer existed, not because he had succeeded in destroying her, but because she had transformed herself into someone stronger. Each brushstroke, each canvas, each shared story was an act of defiance against his attempt to silence me. I was no longer falling. I was flying, carried by the winds of truth and the strength of community. The mountain that was meant to be my end had become my beginning. In my latest painting, I depicted a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. But she wasn't falling or being pushed, she was choosing to spread her wings. Behind her, storm clouds gathered, but ahead the sky was breaking into dawn. It was a self-portrait of sorts, not of who I had been or who I was, but of who I was becoming. The journey wasn't over. Healing rarely follows a straight line, but each day brought new colors to my palette, new strength to my spirit, new opportunities to help others find their voice. James had tried to write my ending, but instead, he had only written his own. My story was just beginning, and this time I held the pen and the paintbrush firmly in my own hands. The morning of James's trial arrived with a heavy Portland rain. I stood at my apartment window, watching droplets trace patterns on the glass, remembering how I used to paint similar patterns in my art studio back in Denver. Michelle appeared beside me, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in hand. Her quiet strength had become my anchor in the storm that was about to begin. Richard Chen had prepared me extensively for what lay ahead. As the key witness, my testimony would be crucial. The prosecution had physical evidence, financial records, and corroborating witnesses, but James's defense team would try to discredit me, to paint me as unstable, attention-seeking, or worse. The thought of facing him in court made my hands shake, but I refused to let fear control me anymore. The courthouse in Denver felt colder than I remembered. Security guards guided me through metal detectors and down long hallways to a private waiting room. Detective Martinez met us there, her familiar presence reassuring. She'd flown to Portland, twice to prep me for testimony, helping me understand how to present the evidence we'd gathered. Dr. Thompson had also made the trip from Portland, ready to testify about the psychological trauma I'd endured. She'd documented everything: the nightmares, the panic attacks, the complex PTSD that still affected my daily life. Her expert testimony would help explain why I hadn't recognized the abuse sooner, why I'd stayed as long as I did. The courtroom fell silent as I entered. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at James, but I could feel his presence like a cold shadow. Gregory Marshall, his defense attorney, sat beside him in an expensive suit, emanating confidence. The prosecutor, Andrea Reynolds, gave me a subtle nod as I took the witness stand. Under direct examination, I told my story chronologically, just as we'd practiced. The early days of our relationship, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the increasing control over every aspect of my life. I described the anniversary trip, the hike to the cliff, the moment everything changed. My voice stayed steady, even as I recounted the fall and my desperate climb down the mountain. Marshall's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned every detail, trying to find inconsistencies. Why hadn't I left earlier if things were so bad? Wasn't it possible I had simply slipped while taking a photo? Wasn't I making these accusations to gain attention for my art career? Each question was designed to make me doubt myself, to make the jury doubt me. But I had something James hadn't counted on: the truth. I answered each question directly, maintaining eye contact with the jury. When Marshall suggested I had staged my own disappearance, I rolled up my sleeve to show the scars from my fall. "These are real," I said quietly. The broken bones were real, the fear was real, and his attempt to kill me was real. During a break in testimony, I finally allowed myself to look at James. He sat there, perfectly composed in his tailored suit, watching me with the same calculating expression I'd seen countless times before. But now I could see through his facade, to the emptiness beneath. He'd lost his power over me the moment I chose to survive. The prosecution's case was strong. They presented evidence of James's financial preparations for my death, the life insurance policy he'd increased 3 months before our anniversary, the offshore accounts he'd set up, the suspicious withdrawals. Digital forensics experts testified about his internet searches for undetectable poisons and fatal hiking accidents. The hikers who found me testified about my condition that day, the severity of my injuries, the impossibility of them being caused by a simple fall. The nurse, Karen, described my physical state in detail, her medical training lending weight to her testimony. Her husband Tom's satellite phone records proved the timeline of events. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. James's former assistant, Rachel, came forward with emails he'd sent the morning of our anniversary hike. In them, he'd laid out his alibi, creating a paper trail of concern and worry before I'd even disappeared. The premeditation was clear. During closing arguments, Andrea Reynolds painted a picture of calculated malice, a man who had systematically isolated and controlled his wife before attempting to murder her for financial gain. Marshall tried to maintain the narrative of a tragic accident, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury took less than 6 hours to reach a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced James to 25 years in prison. As they led him away, he finally lost his composure, turning to shout at me. "You would be nothing without me!" His voice cracked with rage. I stood my ground, meeting his gaze steadily. "No, James. I was nothing with you. Now I'm finally myself again." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered asking for statements. Michelle stood protectively at my side as I addressed the cameras. "Today isn't just about justice for me," I said. "It's about every person trapped in an abusive relationship. Everyone who thinks they can't escape. Everyone who's afraid to speak up. Your voice matters. Your life matters. and there are people who will help you find your way to freedom. That evening, back in my hotel room, I opened my sketchbook and began to draw. The image that emerged wasn't of courtrooms or cliffs or fear. It was a phoenix, rising from ashes, its wings made of brushstrokes and hope. I titled it Verdict and added it to my growing collection of survival art. Dr. Thompson called to check on me, reminding me that even victory can trigger trauma responses. She was right. That night, the nightmares returned. But this time, when I woke up gasping, the fear felt different. It no longer had power over me. I was no longer that woman on the cliff edge, waiting to fall. I had already fallen, survived, and risen. The next morning, I visited my old art classroom at Cherry Creek High School. My former students had created a mural on one wall, a mountain scene with the words, "Rise Up," painted in bold colors. Their art teacher's disappearance and return had taught them something about resilience, about speaking truth to power. I told them my story, not sugarcoating the details but emphasizing the importance of recognizing red flags in relationships. These teenagers, with their whole lives ahead of them, needed to understand that love should never require silence, should never demand the sacrifice of self. Back in Portland, life began to take on new rhythms. The Women's Center asked me to develop an art therapy program for survivors of domestic violence. My own art continued to evolve, moving beyond trauma to explore themes of transformation and rebirth. A major gallery in Seattle expressed interest in showing my work. Michelle's coffee shop became a safe haven for women seeking help. We kept resources discreetly available, phone numbers for shelters, legal aid information, contact details for counselors. Sometimes a woman would sit for hours, clutching a cooling cup of coffee, gathering courage. We learned to recognize the signs, to offer gentle support without pressure. One rainy afternoon, a young woman came into the shop, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She reminded me so much of myself a year ago that my heart ached. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I saw your story," she whispered. "I need help." That day, another journey toward freedom began. The healing process isn't linear. Some days I still jump at unexpected sounds. Some nights, the nightmares return. But now I understand that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about integrating it into a larger story of survival and growth. Each scar is a reminder not of what I lost, but of what I gained. Strength, wisdom, and the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. I've started writing a memoir, combining words with art to tell my story. Not just the story of the fall and survival, but the deeper story of how abuse happens, how it changes you, and how you can find your way back to yourself. The working title is Colors of Survival, and each chapter begins with a painting that captures its emotional essence. Detective Martinez keeps in touch, updating me on James's appeals and ensuring my safety. She's become a friend and ally in the ongoing fight against domestic violence. Together, we speak at law enforcement training sessions, helping officers understand the subtle signs of abuse that often go unnoticed. Richard Chen helped me establish a foundation to provide art supplies and therapy sessions to survivors in shelters. We call it the Mountain Project, because sometimes the biggest obstacles in life become the stepping stones to freedom. The foundation also offers legal aid to women seeking to escape abusive situations. My latest art series explores the concept of metamorphosis, the way trauma can transform you into something stronger, more resilient, more authentically yourself. The centerpiece is a large canvas showing a woman emerging from a chrysalis made of broken chains and shattered mirrors. It's not beautiful in a conventional sense, but it's truthful. Sometimes I drive up to Crown Point, overlooking the Columbia River Gorge. The cliffs there are different from Pikes Peak, gentler, clothed in moss and mist. Standing at the viewpoint, I no longer feel the vertigo of that terrible day. Instead, I feel the vastness of possibility stretching out before me. The woman James tried to destroy no longer exists, but not because he succeeded. She transformed herself, turning trauma into triumph, fear into fierce determination. Every painting I create, every woman I help, every story I share is a testament to the strength that lies within all of us, waiting to be awakened. Last week, I received a letter from a woman in Ohio who had read about my case. She wrote about finding the courage to leave her abusive partner, about using art to reclaim her voice, about finally feeling free to be herself. "Your story showed me it was possible," she wrote. "Thank you for surviving." Those words echo in my heart as I stand before my easel each morning. Surviving isn't just about staying alive. It's about choosing to live fully, authentically, courageously. It's about turning your pain into power, your struggles into strength, your story into a beacon of hope for others. The mountain that was meant to be my end became my beginning. The fall that was meant to destroy me taught me how to fly. And the silence that was meant to erase me became my loudest voice, speaking truth through color and canvas, reaching out to others who are where I once was, showing them the path to freedom. Spring arrived in Portland with an explosion of cherry blossoms, their pink petals dusting the sidewalks outside Michelle's coffee shop. 2 years had passed since that day on Pikes Peak, and life had taken unexpected turns. The mountain project had grown beyond our wildest expectations, with chapters opening in cities across the country. Each location offered art therapy, legal support, and a safe space for survivors to rebuild their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. She was coming to Portland for a domestic violence conference and wanted to meet. Her ongoing support had become invaluable, not just for my case, but for countless others. Together, we had developed training programs for law enforcement, teaching officers to recognize the subtle signs of coercive control and psychological abuse. The morning of her arrival, I was setting up for a new exhibition at the Portland Art Museum. This collection was different from my earlier work. Instead of focusing on trauma, these pieces celebrated resilience and renewal. The centerpiece was a massive installation titled Echo Mountain, a topographical map made entirely of survivors' stories written on strips of paper, each one folded into a mountain peak. Detective Martinez found me arranging the final pieces. She looked different somehow, softer around the edges, less guarded. "Rebecca," she said, hugging me carefully, mindful of the paintbrush in my hand. "The exhibition looks incredible." But I could tell from her expression that she hadn't come just to see my art. Over coffee in Michelle's shop, she shared the news. James was attempting to appeal his conviction, claiming new evidence had surfaced. His legal team was trying to paint a picture of a conspiracy, suggesting I had orchestrated my own disappearance to gain fame and fortune as an artist. The irony might have been amusing if it wasn't so terrifying. My hands shook as I sat down, my coffee cup, memories threatening to overwhelm me. But this time, I had tools to ground myself. Dr. Thompson's voice echoed in my mind, guiding me through the familiar breathing exercises. Michelle appeared silently at my side, her presence a reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. "He can't hurt you," Detective Martinez assured me. "The evidence is solid, but I wanted you to hear it from me first, before the media gets hold of the story." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else." His former cellmate came forward with information. Apparently, James has been trying to hire someone to finish what he started. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Michelle's hand found mine under the table as Martinez continued. "We're taking every precaution. He's been moved to solitary confinement, and we're monitoring all his communications. You're safe, Rebecca. We won't let him hurt you again." That evening, I couldn't paint. Instead, I sat in my studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases, and wrote in my journal. Dr. Thompson had encouraged journaling as a way to process emotions, to track my healing journey. the pages filled with fears, anger, and finally, determination. James might still be trying to control my narrative, but he no longer controlled my life. The next morning, I woke early and drove to Multnomah Falls. The thundering water reminded me of that day on Pikes Peak, but now it felt cleansing rather than threatening. Standing on the bridge, spray misting my face, I made a decision. I wouldn't hide from James's latest attempt to destroy me. I would face it head-on, using my voice and my art to speak even louder. Back at the museum, I added a new element to the installation. Alongside the mountain of survivors' stories, I placed a mirror. Above it, in bold letters, I wrote, "Your story isn't over." Visitors would see themselves reflected among the countless tales of survival, becoming part of the larger narrative of resilience and hope. The exhibition opening drew crowds larger than anyone expected. Survivors from across the country had traveled to Portland to be part of this moment. Each one added their own story to the installation, the mountain growing higher as the evening progressed. Local news covered the event, and soon national media picked up the story. James's appeal attempt had unintentionally given me a platform to reach even more people. Interviews focused not on his accusations, but on the transformative power of art in healing from trauma. The Mountain Project received an influx of donations and support offers. Centers for art therapy and survivor advocacy began opening in cities we hadn't even targeted yet. One morning, while preparing for a workshop at the Women's Center, I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah Martinez, Detective Martinez's teenage daughter, stood nervously in the doorway of my studio. She clutched a sketchbook to her chest, eyes downcast. "Mom told me about your art therapy programs," she said softly. "I need to tell you something." Over the next hour, Sarah shared her own story of relationship abuse. A high school boyfriend, who had isolated her from friends, controlled her social media, and eventually became physically violent. She had been afraid to tell her mother, worried about disappointing her. Her sketchbook was filled with dark, haunting images that echoed my own early trauma artwork. That afternoon, I called Detective Martinez. Hearing her daughter's story was difficult, but it strengthened her resolve to help others. Sarah joined our youth outreach program, using her experience to connect with other young survivors. Her artwork became a powerful tool in educating teenagers about dating violence. The Mountain Project expanded to include a specific program for young people, teaching them about healthy relationships through art and storytelling. Schools began inviting us to give presentations, and soon we had a waiting list of institutions wanting to implement our curriculum. Summer brought a new challenge. A publisher approached me about turning my journal entries and artwork into a book. The idea of sharing my most private thoughts was terrifying, but Dr. Thompson helped me see it as an opportunity to reach people who might not have access to art therapy or support groups. Writing the book forced me to revisit memories I'd tried to bury. I wrote about the small moments, the way James would check my phone while I showered, how he'd criticize my teaching career as just a hobby, the subtle ways he'd undermine my confidence. These details, often overlooked in discussions of domestic violence, were crucial to understanding how abuse escalates. Michelle read each chapter as I wrote it, offering support when the memories became too heavy. She had closed her coffee shop one afternoon a week to host support group meetings, creating a safe space for women to share their stories. The shop had become known in Portland as a sanctuary for those seeking help. One day, while working on the book in my studio, I received a call from Richard Chen. James's appeal had been denied. The evidence against him was too strong, and his conspiracy claims had fallen apart under scrutiny. His former cellmate had provided recordings of James attempting to arrange another attack on me, leading to additional charges. That night, I painted until dawn. The resulting piece showed a woman standing at a crossroads, one path leading into darkness, the other toward light. But unlike my earlier work, both paths showed footprints. evidence of all who had walked these roads before, leaving trails for others to follow. The book launched in autumn, coinciding with Domestic Violence Awareness Month. The cover featured one of my earliest survival paintings, the mountain where James had tried to end my life, transformed into a symbol of strength and renewal. Inside, journal entries intertwined with artwork told a story not just of survival, but of transformation. During the book tour, I met countless survivors who shared their own stories. Many had used art to process their trauma, finding healing in colors and shapes when words failed them. Their artwork began appearing in Mountain Project exhibitions, creating a tapestry of shared experience and collective healing. A woman in CBC, Seattle showed me a tattoo she'd gotten of my Phoenix painting, saying it reminded her daily of her own strength. In Chicago, a group of survivors had started their own art therapy program based on our model. The movement was growing, spreading hope like wildfire across the country. The Mountain Project received a grant to create a documentary about art, therapy, and trauma recovery. Film crews followed our workshops, capturing the moment when a survivor first picked up a brush, when colors began replacing tears, when silence transformed into expression. During filming, I returned to Denver for the first time since the trial. The city felt different now, less threatening, more like a chapter in a story that had already been written. I visited my old art classroom, where my former students had maintained the Rise Up mural, adding their own messages of hope and strength. Standing at the base of Pikes Peak, I felt no fear. The mountain that had almost claimed my life had become a testament to survival. I set up my easel and painted the sunrise, colors bleeding across the canvas like promises of new beginnings. A small crowd gathered to watch, and I shared my story with them, turning the mountain into a classroom. Back in Portland, I added the Denver painting to my studio wall. It joined hundreds of others, artwork from survivors across the country, each piece telling a story of resilience. The studio had become a gallery of transformation, a visual testament to the strength of the human spirit. Dr. Thompson often reminded me that healing isn't a destination but a journey. Some days were still hard. Certain sounds or smells could trigger memories of the fall. But now I had tools to cope, a community to lean on, and a purpose that gave meaning to my survival. The Mountain Project continued to evolve. We developed online resources for those who couldn't attend in-person workshops. Virtual art therapy sessions connected survivors across time zones, creating a global community of support and understanding. Each person who joined our programs added their own voice to the chorus of survival. James's attempt to silence me had instead amplified my voice, turning my personal tragedy into a movement of hope and healing. The mountain he chose as my ending had become a beginning, not just for me, but for countless others finding their way from darkness to light, from silence to expression, from survival to triumph. The autumn rain tapped against my studio windows as I prepared for something I never thought I'd be ready to do. Tomorrow, I would lead my first TED Talk, sharing my story with an audience of thousands. The red carpet marker where I would stand seemed to glow in my mind, a reminder of how far I'd come from that terrifying day on Pikes Peak. Michelle sat cross-legged on my studio floor, helping me organize slides of my artwork for the presentation. Each image told part of my journey, from the dark, chaotic paintings created in those first weeks after the fall, to the more recent pieces that spoke of hope and renewal. The progression was striking, even to me. A notification popped up on my phone, another message from Andrea Reynolds, the prosecutor from James's trial. She had become an unexpected ally in my advocacy work, helping craft legislation to address coercive control in domestic violence cases. The law we were proposing would be named Rebecca's Law, though I still felt strange about that. The message contained news that made my hands tremble. James had been caught attempting to smuggle letters out of prison, letters that detailed plans for revenge against not just me, but Michelle, Detective Martinez, and others who had helped me. The prison had intercepted them, but the threat felt real enough to bring back memories I thought I'd processed. Dr. Thompson had taught me to handle triggers like this. I closed my eyes, grounding myself in the present moment. The smell of oil, paints, the sound of rain, Michelle's steady presence. These were my anchors. When I opened my eyes again, I saw concern on Michelle's face, but also understanding. She didn't need to ask what was wrong. She just handed me a brush. Painting had become my way of processing emotions too complex for words. The canvas before me transformed into a storm of purples and grays, but through the darkness emerged a pattern of golden light. It wasn't planned. My best work rarely was. It simply flowed from somewhere deep inside, where fear and strength danced their eternal dance. That evening, I received an unexpected visit from Kate O'Connor, the support group leader who had helped me in those early days. She brought news about a young woman who had escaped her abusive husband just that morning. The woman had seen my artwork at a local gallery and realized she wasn't alone. Now she needed a safe place to stay while she rebuilt her life. Without hesitation, I offered the spare apartment above my studio. The Mountain Project had recently purchased the building, converting part of it into emergency housing for survivors. Each space was decorated with artwork created by women who had passed through our programs, a visual reminder that healing was possible. As I helped prepare the apartment, I remembered my own first night of freedom in Michelle's spare room. The fear, the uncertainty, the overwhelming feeling of being untethered from everything familiar. But also the first breath of genuine peace I'd had in years. I left a sketchbook and art supplies on the bedside table, along with a note. "Your story isn't over. It's just beginning." The next morning, standing in the wings of the TED stage, I felt those same butterflies of uncertainty. The audience was a sea of faces, each one representing someone who might need to hear my story. Dr. Thompson had helped me prepare for this moment, teaching me to channel my nervous energy into purpose. As I stepped onto the red circle, time seemed to slow down. I began not with the fall, but with a painting, my first self-portrait after escaping James. The image showed a woman whose face was half in shadow, half in light. "This is what survival looks like," I told the audience. "It's not always pretty. It's not always heroic. Sometimes it's just choosing to take the next breath, then the next step, then the next day." The 20 minutes passed in a blur of emotion and connection. I shared not just my story, but the stories of countless others who had found their voice through art. The Mountain Project's work, the transformations I'd witnessed, the power of creativity to heal trauma. It all flowed together into a message of hope and possibility. Afterward, a line of people waited to speak with me. A teenager with blue hair showed me her sketchbook, filled with drawings that echoed my own early work. An elderly man cried as he told me about his daughter, lost to domestic violence years ago. A middle-aged woman slipped me a note with a single sentence. "You made me realize it's not too late to save myself." That night, unable to sleep, I walked to my studio. The young woman we had helped earlier was awake too. I could see light under her door. I heard the soft scratch of pencil on paper and smiled, remembering how art had given me back my voice when words failed. Michelle found me there in the morning, surrounded by new canvases. Each one explored a different aspect of freedom, not just freedom from abuse, but freedom to create, to speak, to live authentically. She brought coffee and, her quiet understanding, sitting with me as dawn painted the sky in shades of promise. A call from Detective Martinez interrupted our peaceful morning. She had updates about James's latest schemes, but also news about Sarah, her daughter. The teen outreach program Sarah had helped develop was being adopted by schools across the state. Her courage in sharing her own story had opened doors for countless young people to recognize and escape toxic relationships. Later that day, I met with Richard Chen to discuss expanding the Mountain Project's legal aid program. The wait list for services grew longer each week as more survivors sought help. We needed more resources, more volunteers, more ways to reach people trapped in the cycle of abuse. A solution presented itself unexpectedly. A prominent tech company's charitable foundation had seen my TED Talk and wanted to fund a digital platform for the Mountain Project. The idea was to create an app that would connect survivors with resources while appearing innocent to abusive partners, disguised as a painting app that actually contained hidden pathways to help. Working with developers, we created something revolutionary. The app allowed users to create digital art while secretly documenting abuse, storing evidence safely in encrypted cloud storage, and connecting with support services. Each brushstroke could tell two stories, one visible, one hidden but preserved for when the survivor was ready to seek help. The project consumed my days, but my nights belonged to art. I was preparing for a new exhibition, one that would travel to cities across the country. The theme was Echoes of Strength, featuring collaborative works created with survivors in each location. Every piece told a story of transformation, of fear turned into power. During this time, I received a letter that shook me to my core. James's mother had written to me, asking to meet. She had finally recognized the truth about her son and wanted to help other parents spot signs of abusive behavior in their children. Her pain was evident in every word, but so was her determination to create change. The meeting was difficult but necessary. She shared childhood stories that helped me understand how James had become the man he was. Not to excuse his actions, but to help prevent others from following the same path. Together, we developed a workshop for parents, teaching them to recognize and address concerning behaviors before they escalated. As autumn deepened into winter, I found myself drawn back to the mountains. Not Pikes Peak this time, but Mount Hood, its snow-capped peak visible from Portland on clear days. Michelle worried about this trip, but understood my need to reclaim my love of hiking, to prove to myself that mountains could still be sources of joy rather than trauma. The climb was challenging, but each step felt like victory. At the summit, I set up my easel and painted the landscape stretching out below. The resulting piece showed not just the physical vista, but the emotional one as well. The long path from victim to survivor to thriver, marked by shadows and light. That painting became the cornerpiece of my traveling exhibition. In each city, it sparked conversations about resilience, about the courage to face fears and reclaim what was lost. Survivors would stand before it for hours, seeing their own journeys reflected in the interplay of darkness and hope. The Mountain Project continued to evolve. We opened a residential art therapy center where survivors could spend weeks or months healing through creativity. The walls filled with their artwork, each piece a testament to the transformative power of expression. Some residents discovered talents they never knew they had, leading to new careers and opportunities. One resident, a former architect, designed an expansion of our facility, a healing garden where outdoor art classes could be held. The space included a small mountain stream, its gentle sound providing both peace and a way to gradually desensitize survivors triggered by running water. As winter turned to spring, I received news that would change everything again. A major publishing house wanted to create a series of art therapy workbooks based on the Mountain Project's programs. This would allow us to reach survivors who couldn't access our physical locations, providing tools for healing through creativity. The first workbook focused on early trauma recovery, guiding survivors through art exercises designed to process fear and rebuild confidence. Each page included artwork and stories from others who had walked the same path, creating a sense of community even in isolation. Working on these books brought me back to my own early drawings, the ones created in those first terrifying weeks after escaping James. Looking at them now, I could see not just the pain, but the seeds of strength. that had grown into who I had become. Every survivor's journey was different, but the power of art to heal remained constant. Spring brought new beginnings in unexpected ways. The young woman who had stayed in our emergency housing had completed her first art show, her work speaking powerfully about transformation and hope. Sarah Martinez had started college, majoring in art therapy with plans to join our team after graduation. The Mountain Project's digital platform had helped hundreds of survivors document abuse and find safety. Each small victory, each story of survival, each piece of art created in healing, they all came together to form something larger than myself. The mountain that was meant to end my story had instead become a beginning, not just for me, but for countless others finding their way from darkness to light. In my studio, I began work on a new series, exploring the concept of echolocation, how we find our way in darkness by listening for reflections of our own voice. Each painting showed a different aspect of this metaphorical journey, from the first tentative calls into the void to the moment of discovering unexpected answers. The series would debut at a fundraiser for the Mountain Project's expansion plans. We needed more space, more resources, more ways to reach those still trapped in the cycle of abuse. The work never ended, but neither did the hope that drove it forward. One story, one painting, one survivor at a time. Morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of the courthouse, casting rainbow shadows across my hands as I prepared to testify before the state legislature. The room buzzed with anticipation as lawmakers gathered to hear testimony on Rebecca's Law, legislation that would revolutionize how the legal system handles domestic violence cases. Dr. Emily Thompson sat beside me, reviewing my notes one last time. Her steady presence had become invaluable not just in my personal healing, but in our broader mission to change how society understands domestic abuse. The law we were proposing would recognize coercive control as a form of domestic violence, making it easier for victims to seek protection before physical abuse begins. The chamber fell silent as I approached the podium. My voice, once silenced by fear, now filled the room with unwavering clarity. I shared not only my story, but the stories of countless others who had found their way to the Mountain Project. Each account illustrated how current laws failed to protect victims until it was almost too late. A state senator interrupted my testimony, questioning why I hadn't left James sooner if things were so bad. The old shame threatened to surface, but I met his gaze steadily. Imagine, I said, that someone gradually turns up the heat in a room. By the time you realize you're burning, you've forgotten what cool air feels like. That's what domestic abuse does. It normalizes the unthinkable until escape seems impossible. Michelle squeezed my hand as I returned to my seat. She had taken the morning off from her coffee shop to support me, just as she had every crucial moment since that day on Pikes Peak. The shop had evolved into more than just a business. It had become a sanctuary where women could discreetly access information about domestic violence resources while appearing to simply enjoy a cup of coffee. During the lunch recess, Detective Martinez pulled me aside with news that made my heart race. James had been caught attempting to manipulate another inmate's girlfriend into making contact with me. The woman had recognized my name from the Mountain Project and reported him immediately. His privileges were revoked, but the incident was a stark reminder that his obsession hadn't diminished. Back in the legislative chamber, other survivors took the stand. Their stories echoed mine in painful ways: the gradual isolation, the psychological manipulation, the moment when they realized their lives were in danger. Each testimony strengthened our case for expanding legal protections to include patterns of controlling behavior. The day ended with a small victory. The committee voted to move the bill forward. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered for statements. I found myself standing at the microphones, Portland's rain creating a soft backdrop to my words. Today, we took a step toward preventing tragedies before they happen. No one should have to fall from a cliff to prove they were in danger. That evening, I retreated to my studio to process the day through art. The painting that emerged showed a woman standing at a podium, but her shadow spread behind her, containing countless other silhouettes. Each figure held a light, their combined glow pushing back the darkness. I titled it Collective Voice and added it to the growing collection for our next exhibition. Richard Chen called late that night with updates about the Mountain Project's latest initiative. We were developing a training program for healthcare providers, teaching them to recognize signs of domestic abuse and coercive control during routine medical visits. The program would include art therapy techniques they could use to help patients communicate when words felt too dangerous. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my studio. Lisa, one of the first women to seek shelter in our emergency. Housing had returned with news. She had completed her degree in social work and wanted to join our team. Her own experience with abuse, combined with her professional training, would make her an invaluable addition to the Mountain Project. As we discussed possibilities for her role, a group of high school students arrived for their weekly art therapy session. These teenagers, many from homes affected by domestic violence, found healing through creative expression. Lisa observed, as I guided them through an exercise in abstract emotional representation, their brushstrokes becoming braver with each passing minute. One student, a quiet girl named Maya, created a particularly powerful piece. The canvas showed a bird cage with an open door, but instead of flying away, the bird was helping other birds escape. When she explained her work to the group, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Her mother, she revealed, had found the courage to leave an abusive relationship after seeing our traveling exhibition. The afternoon brought a meeting with the tech team developing our safety app. They had added new features, a journaling function, disguised as a shopping list, a panic button masquerading as a game icon, and a way to secretly document incidents using the phone's basic functions. Every detail was designed to help survivors gather evidence while maintaining their safety. Sarah Martinez joined us for the meeting, bringing her unique perspective as both a survivor and a future therapist. Her insights helped refine the app's interface to be more intuitive for users in crisis. At 20, she possessed a wisdom born from experience, tempered by healing and education. A call from Andrea Reynolds interrupted our work session. The prosecutor had news about James's latest appeal attempt. His legal team was trying to argue that his actions were influenced by undiagnosed mental health issues, seeking to reduce his sentence. The strategy was unlikely to succeed, but the mere thought of him potentially getting out earlier sent chills down my spine. Dr. Thompson's voice echoed in my mind, reminding me that fear was a normal response to threat, but it didn't have to control my actions. I channeled the anxiety into productivity, focusing on finalizing details for the Mountain Project's upcoming national conference. Survivors, advocates, and professionals from across the country would gather to share knowledge and strengthen our collective response to domestic violence. The conference venue needed artwork for its walls, so I spent the evening creating new pieces specifically for the event. Each painting incorporated elements of hope and transformation. Butterflies emerging from chrysalises, seeds sprouting through concrete, light breaking through storm clouds. The imagery might seem obvious, but sometimes the most powerful messages are the simplest. Michelle arrived with dinner, knowing I would forget to eat when immersed in painting. As we shared Thai takeout on the studio floor, she reminded me of how far we'd come from those first terrifying days after my escape. The Mountain Project had grown from a simple art therapy program into a comprehensive support network, helping survivors rebuild their lives through creativity, community, and practical assistance. A text from Detective Martinez provided a moment of celebration. The officer who had responded to James's false missing person report had started using our training materials in his precinct. More importantly, he had recognized signs of coercive control in a recent case and intervened before the situation turned violent. Small victories like this proved we were making real change. Late that night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to the rooftop garden we had created above the studio. The space had become a haven for survivors, with art stations scattered among the plants and a small fountain whose gentle sound helped desensitize those triggered by running water. Under the stars, I worked on designs for our next expansion, a dedicated children's art therapy center. The following morning brought a meeting with potential donors for the Children's Center. As I presented our vision, I shared artwork created by young survivors in our current programs. Their pieces told stories of resilience that words alone couldn't capture. Homes rebuilt from broken pieces, families finding strength in new configurations, hope blooming in unexpected places. Between meetings, I received an email that stopped me in my tracks. A woman in Australia had seen my TED Talk and used our methods to document her husband's abuse. The evidence she gathered helped her secure custody of her children and start a new life. She had opened her own art therapy practice, creating a ripple effect of healing in her community. The international impact of our work had been unexpected but powerful. The Mountain Project's resources had been translated into multiple languages, and similar programs were starting in countries across the globe. Art, it seemed, truly was a universal language for expressing the inexpressible. Working late in my studio, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Kate O'Connor arrived with news from the support group. Another survivor had found safety, another story of escape and renewal. These moments never lost their power to move me, each one a reminder of why we continued this work despite the challenges and threats. As I added the finishing touches to a piece for the conference, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The mountain that was meant to end my life had instead given birth to a movement, helping countless others find their way from darkness to light. Each brushstroke, each survivor's story, each small victory added another color to the endless canvas of healing and hope. Winter settled over Portland like a heavy blanket, transforming the city into a wonderland of white. Inside my warm studio, surrounded by the scent of oils and turpentine, I worked on a commission that felt different from anything I'd done before. The United Nations had requested a piece for their conference on global women's rights, specifically focusing on domestic violence survival stories from around the world. The massive canvas before me held fragments of stories sent to me by survivors across continents. Each brushstroke incorporated elements of their experiences: a torn sari from India, prayer beads from Turkey, a child's drawing from Brazil. Together, they formed a tapestry of global resilience, showing how pain and healing transcend cultural boundaries. My phone chimed with a message from Detective Martinez. Her voice held an urgency that made my heart skip. James had been caught trying to send coded messages through prison ministry volunteers. The messages contained what appeared to be harmless religious quotes, but when decoded, revealed plans to track my movements once he was released. Even behind bars, his obsession continued to cast shadows. Dr. Thompson arrived for our weekly session, her presence grounding me as we processed this new threat. She helped me understand that my anxiety wasn't weakness. It was my body's wisdom keeping me alert and safe. We worked through breathing exercises specifically designed for trauma survivors, incorporating movement and art to release the tension stored in my muscles. Later that afternoon, Michelle brought up a young woman who had been sitting in her coffee shop for hours, clearly distressed but afraid to ask for help. Together, we approached her gently, recognizing the signs we'd seen so many times before. Her name was Grace, and her story poured out between sobs: a controlling boyfriend, escalating threats, isolation from friends and family. Grace's situation struck close to home. Like me, she was an artist, though her medium was digital animation. Her boyfriend had gradually convinced her that her art was worthless, that she was talentless, that she needed him to succeed. He monitored her online presence, controlled her social media accounts, and had recently started threatening to destroy her equipment if she didn't quit her animation projects. The Mountain Project's emergency housing unit was full, but I offered Grace my guest room. Michelle raised an eyebrow. She knew I rarely brought survivors into my personal space. But something about Grace's story resonated deeply. Perhaps it was the way she described her art as the only thing keeping her sane, or how she used animation to escape into worlds where she felt powerful. That evening, as snow fell outside my studio windows, Grace and I sat surrounded by canvases. She opened her laptop, sharing animations she'd hidden from her boyfriend. They told stories of transformation, butterflies breaking free from crystal, prisons, trees growing through concrete, women turning into dragons. Her talent was undeniable, and her metaphors achingly familiar. A late call from Richard Chen brought unexpected news. The tech company developing our safety app wanted to collaborate with Grace on an animated version for younger users. Her experience, combined with her artistic skills, made her uniquely qualified to create something that could help teenagers recognize and escape toxic relationships. Morning brought Andrea Reynolds to my studio with updates about Rebecca's Law. The legislation had gained support from unexpected quarters, conservative lawmakers moved by stories of their own constituents. She wanted to incorporate Grace's animations into our next presentation, showing how abusers target not just physical safety, but creative expression itself. Working with Grace sparked new ideas for the Mountain Project. We began developing a digital arts program alongside our traditional art therapy sessions. Many younger survivors felt more comfortable expressing themselves through technology, and the skills they learned could lead to career opportunities. Sarah Martinez joined us for lunch, bringing excitement about her latest project. She'd created a peer counseling program at her university, using art therapy techniques to help students recognize and escape dating violence. Her own experience as a survivor gave her unique insight into how abuse patterns manifest in young relationships. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor, Karen, the nurse who had helped save my life that day on Pikes Peak. She had relocated to Portland and wanted to volunteer with the Mountain Project. Her medical expertise would be invaluable in documenting injuries and training healthcare providers to recognize signs of abuse. As Karen and I caught up, Grace worked nearby on storyboards for the app animations. Sometimes she would pause, overcome by memories or fear, and we would all stop to support her. Recovery isn't linear. It's a dance of progress and pause, breakthrough and breathe, healing and hope. Detective Martinez called with news about James's prison ministry scheme. The investigation had revealed a network of enablers, people who believed his claims of innocence and saw him as a victim of circumstance. Their willingness to help him highlighted the importance of education about how abusers manipulate perceptions. That night, unable to sleep, I found Grace in the studio, animating by moonlight. She was creating a sequence about a woman trapped in a glass box, watching it slowly fill with water. But in her version, the woman didn't drown. She transformed the water into wings and soared free. We worked side by side until dawn, each processing our trauma through our chosen medium. The next day brought a meeting with international representatives interested in implementing the Mountain Project's programs in their countries. Through video conference, we connected with advocates from Japan, Kenya, Argentina, and Norway. Despite our different languages and cultures, the patterns of abuse and the healing power of art remained constant. Grace's presence added depth to our presentation. Her animations illustrated the subtle progression of coercive control in ways words alone couldn't capture. Watching her confidence grow as professionals praised her work reminded me of my own journey from victim to advocate. Michelle arrived with afternoon coffee and news from her shop's support network. 3 women had sought help that week alone, each one finding their way to safety through the quiet sanctuary of a neighborhood cafe. Sometimes the smallest spaces hold the largest potential for change. As evening approached, Dr. Thompson joined us for a group therapy session. She had begun incorporating digital art therapy into her practice, inspired by Grace's work. Together, we explored how different forms of creative expression could unlock trauma stored in the body and mind. The snow continued falling as we worked late into the night. Grace animated while I painted, our artistic conversation flowing between digital and traditional mediums. She created a sequence of a woman climbing a mountain made of broken promises, while I painted the summit bathed in dawn's light. Different techniques, same story of survival. A text from Detective Martinez interrupted our creative flow. The prison ministry investigation had uncovered something unexpected. James had been diagnosing himself with various mental health conditions, building groundwork for an insanity defense in his next appeal. His manipulation knew no bounds. Dr. Thompson reminded me that abusers often use mental health claims strategically, not because they seek healing, but because they seek control. We discussed incorporating this insight into our training programs for legal professionals and healthcare providers. Sarah arrived the next morning with exciting news. Her university had approved funding for a permanent art therapy center focused on preventing dating violence. The space would combine traditional studio arts with digital media, creating safe spaces for students to explore and express their experiences. Grace's boyfriend had discovered her absence and begun a campaign of harassment, calling her workplace and family with lies about her mental state. The pattern was familiar: attempt to discredit the victim, paint himself as the concerned partner. But this time, we were ready. Richard Chen helped Grace document the harassment, while Karen provided medical documentation of the anxiety attacks, triggered by his calls. The Mountain Project's legal team moved swiftly to secure a restraining order, while our tech team helped her regain control of her compromised social media accounts. Working on the UN Commission piece became a group project. Grace incorporated animated elements that could be triggered by viewers' movements, while Sarah added a social media component allowing survivors worldwide to contribute their stories. The resulting installation would combine traditional painting, digital art, and interactive elements in a powerful testament to survival. As winter deepened, our studio became a haven for artists breaking free from abuse. Grace's presence had opened new possibilities, showing how different forms of creative expression could work together in healing. Traditional painters collaborated with digital artists. Sculptors worked alongside animators, each medium adding its voice to our collective story of survival. The Mountain Project's next initiative began taking shape: a digital storytelling platform where survivors could share their experiences through various artistic mediums. Grace led workshops teaching basic animation skills, while I guided participants in finding their visual voice, whether through traditional art or technology. Late one night, as snow fell silently outside, Grace shared something profound. In animation, she said, we create illusion of movement, one frame at a time. Recovery is like that. Tiny changes that add up to transformation. We're all animating our own healing, frame by frame, day by day. Her words captured something essential about survival, how small acts of courage and creativity accumulate into lasting change. Each brushstroke, each keyframe, each moment of choosing to continue despite fear adds to our story of transformation. The UN piece neared completion as winter began to fade. It stood as a testament to survival's many forms, combining traditional and digital art in a way that spoke to both personal and universal experiences of trauma and healing. Like the survivors whose stories it told, it proved that beauty could emerge from darkness, that art could transform pain into power, that healing could take many forms but always led toward light. Spring sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the new Mountain Project headquarters in downtown Portland. The converted warehouse space hummed with activity as survivors moved between art stations, each finding their own path to healing through creative expression. The expansion had been made possible by an unexpected source, a tech billionaire's wife who had secretly followed our work while gathering courage to leave her abusive marriage. Today marked the launch of our newest initiative, a virtual reality program designed to help law enforcement and medical professionals understand the psychological impact of coercive control. The project combined survivor testimonies with immersive art experiences, allowing participants to experience the gradual erosion of autonomy that characterizes domestic abuse. Dr. Emily Thompson watched as the first group of police officers donned VR headsets. Their reactions spoke volumes. Seasoned detectives removed their headsets with tears in their eyes, understanding for the first time how subtle manipulation could trap someone in an abusive relationship. One officer admitted he'd never understood why victims didn't just leave until experiencing our simulation. Detective Martinez arrived with urgent news that made my heart race. James had begun corresponding with a true crime author interested in writing about our case. The writer had contacted several people from my past, seeking interviews about our relationship. The thought of James controlling the narrative, even from prison, sent chills down my spine. Michelle found me in my private studio, where I'd retreated, to process this latest development. Without a word, she set up her laptop and began drafting a press release. If James wanted to tell his version of events, we would counter with truth. The Mountain Project would launch a documentary series featuring unedited survivor stories, starting with my own. Sarah Martinez, now in her final year of art therapy training, suggested incorporating augmented reality elements into the documentary. Viewers could scan artwork created during different stages of recovery, accessing layers of meaning and healing journeys hidden within each piece. Her innovative approach to combining technology with traditional art therapy had already gained national attention. A call from Andrea Reynolds brought unexpected support. Several prominent domestic violence survivors in the entertainment industry had heard about James's book deal and offered to help fund our documentary series. Their involvement would ensure our message reached a broader audience, potentially helping countless others recognize signs of abuse before it escalated. The afternoon brought a workshop with new residents in our emergency housing program. Among them was Olivia, a former software engineer whose abusive husband had used technology to stalk and control her. She offered invaluable insights into how abusers exploit digital vulnerabilities, helping us enhance security measures for our online resources. Richard Chen joined us later, bringing updates about Rebecca's Law's implementation in other states. The legislation had sparked a national conversation about coercive control, leading to similar bills being introduced across the country. Each new law represented potential protection for countless individuals trapped in abusive situations. Working late in my studio, I received a message that made me pause. A woman in Tokyo had created an art installation inspired by my story, using traditional Japanese techniques to explore themes of survival and renewal. Her work had sparked a movement in Japan, breaking cultural silence around domestic violence through artistic expression. Dr. Thompson's evening group therapy session focused on using mixed media to express complex trauma. Survivors combined traditional painting with digital elements, created sculptures incorporating written testimonies, and used movement to interact with their artwork. The boundaries between different forms of expression blurred, creating new pathways to healing. Kate O'Connor arrived with news from the support group network. The anonymous messaging system we'd implemented through local coffee shops had helped identify a trafficking ring preying on domestic violence victims. The information had been passed to law enforcement, leading to several arrests and the liberation of multiple victims. The next morning brought a surprise visit from Karen, the nurse who'd helped save my life. She'd developed a training program for emergency room staff, using our VR simulation to help medical professionals identify subtle signs of abuse. Her work had already led to increased intervention rates in several major hospitals. Grace's animations had evolved into a full-length film about emotional abuse and recovery. Using a combination of traditional and digital techniques, she depicted the invisible wounds of psychological violence and the transformative power of creative expression. Major streaming services were competing for distribution rights, ensuring her message would reach millions. Detective Martinez called with updates about James's prison activities. His collaboration with the true crime author had revealed new attempts to manipulate public perception. He portrayed himself as a misunderstood husband whose wife had abandoned him for fame and fortune. The truth would need to be louder than his lies. The documentary team arrived to begin filming. We transformed the main gallery into a storytelling space where survivors could share their experiences surrounded by artwork that chronicled their journeys. Each piece told part of a larger narrative about transformation and healing. Sarah's augmented reality elements added depth to the exhibition. Visitors could point their phones at various artworks to access hidden layers, voice recordings, animation sequences, and interactive elements that revealed the complex nature of recovery. Technology became a window into the soul of survival. Michelle organized a private viewing for law enforcement officials and legislators. Watching them engage with the multimedia installation, seeing understanding dawn in their eyes, reinforced the power of combining artistic expression with educational advocacy. Real change required touching both hearts and minds. The evening brought a virtual conference with international partners. The Mountain Project's methods were being adapted for different cultural contexts, proving that art's healing power transcends linguistic and social barriers. From rural India to urban Brazil, survivors found their voices through creative expression. Late night found me in my studio, working on a new series exploring the intersection of technology and trauma recovery. Each canvas incorporated QR codes that, when scanned, revealed digital artworks created by survivors worldwide. The project represented a bridge between traditional and modern forms of healing expression. Olivia's tech expertise proved invaluable. As we developed new security features for our online platforms, she created systems that allowed survivors to document abuse securely, storing evidence in encrypted clouds that abusers couldn't access or detect. Her work provided crucial tools for those still trapped in dangerous situations. Dr. Thompson integrated these technological advances into her therapy practice, helping survivors reclaim digital spaces that had been weapons of control. Through secure art-sharing platforms and virtual support groups, isolation transformed into connection, fear into empowerment. The documentary crew captured these developments, showing how the Mountain Project had evolved from a simple art therapy program into a comprehensive movement combining creativity, technology, and advocacy. Each interview revealed new facets of survival, new ways that art and innovation could light paths to freedom. Grace's animation team worked alongside traditional artists, creating multimedia installations that spoke to younger audiences. Her insight into digital abuse and creative suppression helped shape our outreach to tech-savvy generations, showing them how to recognize and resist controlling behavior in both physical and virtual spaces. A message from Detective Martinez brought both concern and validation. James's true crime book collaboration had fallen through. The author had recognized his manipulation tactics and withdrawn from the project. However, James had already begun reaching out to other writers, proving his determination to control the narrative. Richard Chen suggested a preemptive strategy. Rather than waiting for James's version of events, we would publish a collaborative book featuring artwork and stories from survivors around the world. Their collective truth would drown out his attempts at manipulation. The day ended with a new arrival at our emergency housing unit. A young digital artist whose boyfriend had been selling her artwork without her consent, claiming credit for her creations. Her situation highlighted how abusers adapt their tactics to changing times, finding new ways to exploit and control their victims. Working with her reminded me of my own journey, how art had been both target and salvation. In my studio that night, I began a new piece combining traditional painting with embedded electronics. LEDs beneath the paint would activate in response to viewers' movements, creating an interactive experience of emergence from darkness into light. Sarah arrived early the next morning, excited about incorporating biofeedback elements into our therapy programs. Survivors could see how their bodies responded to creating art, understanding the physical impact of both trauma and healing. science and art merged in service of recovery. The documentary team captured these innovations, showing how the Mountain Project continued to evolve and adapt. Each new challenge sparked creative solutions. Each survivor's story added another layer to our understanding of both abuse and healing. As spring deepened into summer, our work expanded in unexpected directions. The virtual reality program began touring police academies nationwide. Grace's animation series won awards for social impact. Our secure documentation app helped hundreds of survivors gather evidence safely. Yet beneath these successes, the core truth remained unchanged. Art, in all its forms, provided a voice for the voiceless, a way to speak the unspeakable, a path from darkness to light. Whether through paint or pixels, movement or music, creative expression continued to transform trauma into triumph. One survivor at a time. Summer heat shimmered over Portland as I stood before an auditorium packed with medical students at Oregon Health Sciences University. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the presentation remote, but my voice remained steady. Teaching future doctors to recognize subtle signs of abuse had become a crucial part of the Mountain Project's mission, especially after discovering how many survivors first disclosed their situations to healthcare providers. A young resident raised her hand during the Q&A session, her voice thick with emotion as she described a patient she now realized had been seeking help through coded language. This was why we did this work. These moments of recognition could save lives. Dr. Emily Thompson stepped forward to provide specific protocols for medical professionals suspecting abuse, her expertise bridging the gap between clinical practice and trauma-informed care. Detective Martinez texted during the break with disturbing news. James had started a blog through an intermediary, posting carefully crafted entries about redemption and forgiveness. His words seemed sincere to those who didn't understand the manipulation tactics of abusers. The blog had gained a following among men's rights activists who painted him as a victim of false accusations. Michelle met me at her coffee shop afterward, her familiar calm helping steady my nerves. She'd hired 3 survivors through the Mountain Project's employment program, creating a support network disguised as a typical cafe staff. Regular customers never realized the barista asking about their day might also be their lifeline to safety. Sarah Martinez burst through the door, excitement radiating from her face. Her university research project combining art therapy with neuroscience had received major funding. Using brain imaging technology, she could now document how creative expression physically altered trauma responses in the brain, providing scientific validation for our therapeutic approaches. Richard Chen arrived with papers requiring my immediate attention. A prominent tech company wanted to develop virtual reality experiences based on survivor stories, aiming to create empathy training programs for corporate environments. The contract needed careful review to ensure survivors maintained control over their narratives. Grace joined our discussion, bringing fresh perspective from her work with young digital artists. She'd discovered an underground network of abusers, sharing techniques for controlling their partners through technology. Monitoring software disguised as gaming apps, spyware hidden in digital art files. Her insights helped us develop new safety protocols for our online platforms. The afternoon brought a workshop with international journalists covering domestic violence. Teaching them to recognize manipulation tactics in perpetrator interviews felt crucial, especially with James's blog gaining traction. Andrea Reynolds provided legal context while I shared personal insights into how abusers craft their public images. Dr. Thompson's evening therapy group focused on reclaiming digital spaces. Survivors worked on art projects incorporating technology that had once been used to control them. Watching them transform tools of oppression into instruments of healing reminded me how resilience could reshape even the darkest experiences. Karen arrived with updates from the emergency room training program. Hospitals implementing our protocols had seen a significant increase in domestic violence identification and intervention. Medical staff reported feeling more confident approaching suspected abuse cases, understanding that asking the right questions could open doors to safety. Late night found me in my studio, working on a multimedia installation for an upcoming international conference. The piece combined traditional painting with motion sensors and sound elements, creating an immersive experience of emergence from trauma. Each brushstroke contained embedded conductive paint, allowing viewers to trigger audio testimonies through touch. Olivia called with breakthrough news about our secure documentation app. She developed an algorithm that could detect and alert users to surveillance software on their devices while appearing as an innocent art application. This technological shield could protect countless survivors gathering evidence of abuse. The next morning brought a surprise visit from a renowned trauma researcher interested in studying the Mountain Project's methods. Her preliminary data suggested that combining traditional art therapy with digital innovation significantly improved outcomes for survivors of complex trauma. Detective Martinez arranged a meeting with cybercrime specialists concerning James's blog. His posts had begun, including subtle references to locations and events from our past. Messages that seemed innocent to outsiders, but carried veiled threats. Even from prison, he sought ways to maintain psychological control. Sarah's latest brain imaging studies revealed fascinating patterns. When survivors engaged in creative expression, their neural activity showed increased connectivity between regions associated with trauma and those linked to healing. Art literally helped rebuild pathways in their wounded minds. Grace's animation team completed a series of educational videos for middle schools, teaching young people to recognize early warning signs of controlling relationships. The characters she created resonated deeply with teenagers, sparking important conversations about boundaries and respect. Michelle organized a coffee shop poetry night, featuring survivors sharing their stories through spoken word and visual art. The event provided a platform for creative expression while raising awareness about domestic violence in unexpected spaces. Regular customers found themselves drawn into profound discussions about power and control. Dr. Thompson integrated new virtual reality elements into her therapy sessions, allowing survivors to safely confront and process traumatic memories through artistic expression in digital spaces. The technology provided a buffer between raw emotion and healing, making difficult work more manageable. Richard Chen brought proposals from several states interested in implementing Rebecca's Law. Each jurisdiction needed to adapt the legislation to local conditions while maintaining its essential protections against coercive control. The legal landscape of domestic violence was slowly shifting toward greater understanding and accountability. A group of international artists arrived for a collaborative project combining traditional and digital techniques. Together, we created installations exploring universal themes of survival and transformation. Language barriers dissolved as art spoke its own truth about trauma and healing. Karen's medical training program expanded to include pediatric units, teaching healthcare providers to recognize signs of children living with domestic violence. The artwork created by young survivors became a powerful tool for understanding their experiences and needs. Olivia discovered concerning patterns in social media algorithms that potentially exposed survivors to their abusers. Working with platform developers, she helped create safety features that protected user privacy without limiting their ability to seek support and connection. The documentary team captured these developments, showing how the Mountain Project continued evolving to meet new challenges. Each innovation sparked others, creating a network of solutions for problems we hadn't even recognized when we began this work. Late evening brought a call from Andrea Reynolds about James's latest legal maneuvers. His attorneys claimed that prison rehabilitation programs had transformed him, arguing for reduced supervision upon eventual release. The familiar anxiety surfaced, but now I had tools to manage it. Sarah's research expanded to include studying how different art forms affected trauma recovery. Digital creation showed distinct patterns from traditional painting, each offering unique benefits for healing. Understanding these differences helped us tailor therapy programs to individual needs. Grace noticed emerging trends in online abuse tactics, particularly in creative communities. abusers increasingly targeted their victims' artistic expression, using copyright claims and platform reporting systems as weapons of control. Her insights helped us develop countermeasures and support systems. The night ended with a new arrival at our emergency housing unit. A young photographer fled her abusive partner with only her camera and memory cards containing evidence of his violence. Her digital archives would help build a case while her artistic eye captured the journey from victim to survivor. Working in my studio until dawn, I created pieces exploring the intersection of memory and healing. Each canvas incorporated elements that changed under different types of light, revealing hidden layers of story and survival. Technology enhanced rather than replaced traditional artistic expression. Dr. Thompson's morning group focused on creative responses to digital abuse. Survivors learned to reclaim online spaces through art, turning social media from a source of anxiety into a platform for empowerment. Their work reached others still trapped in cycles of control and fear. Michelle expanded her coffee shop network, creating a system of safe spaces across the city. Each location offered subtle access to resources while providing genuine community connection. The model spread to other cities, creating nationwide chains of sanctuary disguised as ordinary cafes. Detective Martinez shared insights from law enforcement training programs using our virtual reality simulations. Officers reported profound shifts in their understanding of domestic violence after experiencing the gradual erosion of autonomy through immersive technology. Richard Chen coordinated with international legal experts adapting the Mountain Project's methods to different cultural contexts. Art provided a universal language for expressing trauma and healing, while technology bridged gaps in resources and access. The day ended with a collaborative session between traditional artists and digital creators, each bringing unique perspectives to the work of transformation through creative expression. Their combined efforts produced powerful new tools for understanding and healing from abuse. As summer faded into autumn, the Mountain Project continued expanding its reach while maintaining its core mission. Every innovation, every new program, every technological advance served the fundamental goal of helping survivors reclaim their voices and rebuild their lives. The evening light filtered through studio windows as I added final touches to a piece combining ancient techniques with modern technology. Like the survivors whose stories it honored, the work transformed darkness into light, pain into power, silence into symphony. Art, in all its forms, remained our strongest voice against violence, our surest path toward healing. The crisp autumn morning painted Portland's skyline in shades of gold and crimson as I stood at the window of the Mountain Project's new healing center. 5 years had passed since that fateful day on Pikes Peak, and life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Today marked a significant milestone: the opening of our first comprehensive survivor recovery facility, combining art therapy, technology, and holistic healing under one roof. Detective Martinez arrived early, her presence a reminder of how far we'd come. She carried news that made my heart both heavy and light. James had been denied parole. His attempts to manipulate the system through false redemption narratives had failed. The evidence we'd gathered, including his continued attempts to control and intimidate from prison, ensured he would serve his full sentence. Dr. Emily Thompson joined us in the center's main gallery, where survivor artwork lined the walls in a stunning testament to resilience. Each piece told a story of transformation, from traditional paintings to interactive digital installations. The space hummed with possibility, ready to welcome those still finding their way from darkness to light. Michelle had transformed her original coffee shop into a nationwide network of safe spaces, each location serving as a discreet entry point to domestic violence resources. Today, she unveiled the latest innovation, a seemingly ordinary loyalty app that actually provided secure communication channels for survivors seeking help. Sarah Martinez, now a leading researcher in trauma-informed art therapy, presented her groundbreaking findings. Her studies proved that creative expression physically rewired trauma responses in the brain, offering hope for healing even the deepest wounds. The medical community finally had concrete evidence of what we'd known all along: art saves lives. Grace's animation studio occupied the center's top floor, where she trained survivors in digital arts and technology. Her program had already launched numerous careers, helping women reclaim their financial independence through creative work. Today, she premiered a virtual reality experience that would revolutionize empathy training for law enforcement and healthcare providers. Richard Chen brought representatives from the United Nations who were studying the Mountain Project as a model for global domestic violence intervention. Our combination of artistic expression, technological innovation, and practical support had proven uniquely effective across cultural boundaries. What began in one studio now reached survivors worldwide. Karen's medical response team demonstrated new protocols for emergency departments, using art-based assessment tools to identify domestic violence cases. The simple act of offering a patient colored pencils and paper often opened doors that direct questioning couldn't breach. Hospitals nationwide had adopted her methods, saving countless lives. Olivia's tech team showcased their latest security innovations, seemingly innocent art apps that actually provided sophisticated protection for survivors documenting abuse. Her work had exposed hundreds of abusers using technology as a weapon of control, while giving survivors tools to safely gather evidence and seek help. Andrea Reynolds arrived with transformative news. Rebecca's Law had been adopted federally, creating unprecedented legal protection against coercive control. The legislation now served as a model for countries worldwide, proving that one survivor's story could change the landscape of justice. Dr. Thompson's morning therapy group filled the art studio with energy as survivors explored new forms of expression. Traditional painting merged with digital media, creating powerful testimonies of transformation. Some worked in virtual reality spaces, safely processing trauma through avatar interactions. Others found healing in the tactile comfort of clay and canvas. The documentary team captured everything, adding to our growing archive of survivor stories. These records served multiple purposes: evidence for legal cases, training materials for professionals, and most importantly, beacons of hope for others still trapped in abuse. Each testimony proved that escape was possible, that healing could happen, that life could begin again. Sarah's latest research project studied intergenerational trauma healing through collaborative art. Mothers and children created together, rebuilding bonds damaged by domestic violence. Their artwork spoke volumes about recovery, resilience, and the power of creative connection to mend wounded relationships. Grace noticed a young woman hesitating at the center's entrance, gathering courage to step inside. We recognized that moment of decision, the precious instant when survival instinct overcomes fear. Together, we welcomed her into the space, showing her that she wasn't alone, that her story mattered, that hope lived here. Michelle organized community outreach events, bringing awareness to unexpected places. Art galleries hosted survivor exhibitions, coffee shops became sanctuaries, public spaces transformed into platforms for change. The wall of silence surrounding domestic violence crumbled as creativity gave voice to the voiceless. Detective Martinez shared success stories from law enforcement partners using our virtual reality training. Officers learned to recognize subtle signs of abuse, to ask the right questions, to offer help without judgment. Their enhanced understanding led to more successful interventions and prosecutions. Richard Chen coordinated with international legal teams adapting our methods to different cultural contexts. Art transcended language barriers, allowing survivors worldwide to share their experiences and strength. Technology bridged geographical gaps, creating global networks of support and understanding. Karen's medical team expanded their training to include mental health professionals, social workers, and school counselors. The ripple effect of early intervention spread through communities, catching abuse patterns before they escalated to physical violence. Art became a diagnostic tool, a window into hidden trauma. Olivia's security protocols evolved to match emerging threats, protecting survivors in an increasingly digital world. Her team stayed one step ahead of abusers' technological tactics, creating safe spaces online where survivors could connect, share resources, and find their way to freedom. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from a survivor who'd found safety through our program years ago. Now she ran her own art therapy center, extending the Mountain Project's mission to rural communities. Her success embodied our core belief that helping one person find their voice creates endless possibilities for change. Dr. Thompson integrated new therapeutic approaches, combining traditional art therapy with emerging technologies. Survivors could now process trauma through multiple channels, finding healing methods that resonated with their unique experiences. The blend of old and new techniques proved particularly effective for complex trauma cases. Grace's animation team completed a series exploring digital abuse in relationships, helping young people recognize warning signs in online interactions. The projects reached millions through social media, sparking crucial conversations about consent, control, and healthy boundaries in virtual spaces. Michelle expanded the coffee shop network's capabilities, adding virtual support groups disguised as online book clubs. These digital gathering spaces provided crucial connection for isolated survivors, particularly in rural areas where resources were scarce. Technology transformed distance from barrier to bridge. Sarah's research revealed fascinating patterns in how different art forms affected trauma recovery. Digital creation showed distinct benefits from traditional media, each offering unique pathways to healing. Understanding these differences helped us tailor therapy programs to individual needs and preferences. The day's events culminated in a multimedia exhibition combining survivor artwork with interactive technology. Visitors experienced immersive installations exploring themes of transformation and renewal. Virtual reality spaces allowed them to witness domestic violence's impact from multiple perspectives, fostering deeper understanding and empathy. As evening approached, a candlelight vigil honored lives lost to domestic violence while celebrating survivors' resilience. The ceremony incorporated art projections onto building facades, transforming city architecture into canvases of remembrance and hope. Public spaces became galleries of collective healing. Detective Martinez shared developments in James's case. His blog had been exposed as a manipulation tool, its false narrative of redemption thoroughly debunked. The truth prevailed through careful documentation and survivor testimony. His attempts to control the story from prison had ultimately failed. Richard Chen coordinated with policymakers implementing Rebecca's Law, ensuring its provisions adequately addressed both traditional and digital abuse. The legislation's success sparked international interest, with countries worldwide adopting similar protections against coercive control. Karen's emergency response protocols gained recognition from major medical associations, becoming standard practice in hospitals nationwide. Healthcare providers learned to recognize art as both diagnostic tool and healing modality, integrating creative expression into traditional treatment plans. Olivia's team unveiled new security features for survivor documentation, including artificial intelligence that could detect manipulated evidence. This technology proved crucial in legal cases, protecting survivors from abusers' attempts to distort reality through digital means. The Mountain Project's influence continued growing, reaching survivors through countless channels. Each success story added momentum to the movement, proving that creative expression could transform trauma into triumph. Art remained our universal language of healing and hope. As night fell over Portland, I returned to my studio, reflecting on the journey that brought us here. The canvas before me slowly filled with images of transformation. Butterflies emerging from chrysalises, seeds, breaking through concrete, light-piercing darkness. Each brushstroke honored countless survivors finding their way to freedom. The documentary team captured final shots for their series, showcasing the Mountain Project's evolution from single studio to global movement. Our story proved that 1. Person's survival could spark endless possibilities for change, that art could bridge the gap between trauma and healing, that hope could flourish in unexpected places. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new survivors seeking safety, new opportunities for transformation through creative expression. But tonight, watching moonlight paint shadows across canvas and screen, I felt profound gratitude for this journey, from victim to advocate, from silence to voice, from darkness to light. Life had come full circle, yet the circle kept expanding. Each survivor who found their voice through art added another thread to our tapestry of healing. Their stories merged with mine, creating something larger than individual experience, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for renewal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.